channels should be maintained for dialogue with the authorities of the Russian Federation, not only so that they cooperate with all the mechanisms which are part of the universal system of protection of human rights, but also to insist on the urgent need to find in dialogue the diplomatic solution which restores peace in Ukraine. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Mexico. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Chile.
Thank you, Mr. President. Allow me to start my intervention by paying tribute to the brutal war that is taking place in Ukraine, caused by an aggression that violated international law, international humanitarian law, and the UN Charter. The tragic images of Bucha that came to our homes last week moved us tremendously. We condemn the invasion of Ukraine. The decision that we are discussing is a decision that my country would have never wanted to discuss. We are fully in favor of multilateralism. The multilateral system is a home for everyone. However, to be a member of the Human Rights Council involves certain requirements, including conduct consistent with the promotion and protection of human rights everywhere. As member states of this assembly adopted a relevant resolution which states that the members of the Human Rights Council must follow the strictest standards in the promotion and protection of human rights. That same resolution in paragraph 8 entrusts to this assembly the responsibility of suspending a member state from the council when that state does not comply with the strict norms of protecting and promoting human rights. Our responsibility to human rights, rather than a specific country or Russia or Ukraine, our responsibilities to human rights, and the suspension of the Russian Federation from the Human Rights Council in this case, we're talking about a state that is violating the rights of a third state, Ukraine, and this is a result of an unacceptable aggression and invasion that is contravenes international law. This is why our delegation will vote in favor of the resolution L.4, which suspends the membership of Russia from the Human Rights Council. Chile once again reiterates its appeal to all parties to continue negotiations and urges for an immediate and peaceful resolution of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine through a political dialogue, negotiations through peaceful means in conformity with international law. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Chile. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Belarus.
Mr. President, Belarus is categorically against the draft resolution under consideration. The introduction of this draft is motivated by exclusively political interests aimed at demonizing the Russian Federation and attempting to isolate it in international organizations. Such ideas lead to upsetting the equilibrium of the entire system of international cooperation, which is based on the UN Charter, and it could have a long-term negative impact, even leading to the destruction of the UN as a whole. In essence, today's proposal to exclude Russia is a direct contribution to destroying the Human Rights Council itself and in consolidating the destruction of the system of upholding human rights under the UN auspices, which has been expressed over the past few weeks in attitudes of racism, xenophobia, and other manifestations of discrimination based on language, culture, religion, or other characteristics that we're seeing in Western countries. It's important to focus not on short-term immediate tasks under the influence of emotions, but rather to think about the long-term prospects of resolving conflict situations and about the post-conflict world order. The resolution that is being proposed, just like other steps on restricting the participation of Russia in international organizations, will not only not make a contribution to resolving the situation in Ukraine, but rather will increase risks for any possibility of peaceful negotiations, which were initiated, I just want to recall, a month ago by the Republic of Belarus and personally its president, Alexander Lukashenko. So we call on you to think about, to reflect on this, and to vote against the proposed draft resolution. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the distinguished representative of Belarus. We have heard the last speaker in explanation of vote before the vote. The Assembly will now take a decision on a draft resolution A/ES-11/L4 entitled Suspension of the Rights of the Membership of the Russian Federation in the Human Rights Council. Pursuant to Resolution 60/251 of 15 March 2006, the General Assembly, by a 2/3 majority of members present and voting, may suspend the rights of membership in the Council of a member of the Council that commits gross and systematic violation of human rights. For your information, the draft resolution has closed for e-sponsorship. I now give the floor to the representative of the Secretariat.
Thank you, Mr. President. I should like to announce that since the submission of the draft resolution, and in addition to the delegations listed on the L document, the following countries have also become co-sponsors of A/ES-11/L4: Costa Rica, Guatemala, Myanmar, and San Marino. If any other countries wish to co-sponsor A/ES-11/L4, please signify by pressing the microphone button now. I see none. I thank you. Sorry, Tonga. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the Secretariat. A recorded vote has been requested. We shall now begin the voting process. Those in favor of draft resolution A/ES-11/L4, please signify. Those against, abstentions.
The General Assembly is now voting on draft resolution A/ES-11/L4, entitled Suspension of the Rights of Membership of the Russian Federation in the Human Rights Council. Will all delegations confirm that their votes are accurately reflected on the screen? The voting has been completed. Please lock the machine.
The result of the vote is as follows. In favor, 93, against, 24, abstentions, 58. Draft resolution A/ES-11/L4 is adopted. Before giving the floor for explanations of vote after the vote, may I remind delegations that explanations of vote are limited to 10 minutes and should be made by delegations from their seats. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of India.
Thank you, Mr. President. India has abstained on the resolution adopted in the General Assembly today. We do so for reasons of both substance and process. Since the inception of the Ukrainian conflict, India has stood for peace, dialogue, and diplomacy. We believe that no solution can be arrived at by shedding blood and at the cost of innocent lives. If India has chosen any side, it is the side of peace, and it is for an immediate end to violence. We continue to remain deeply concerned at the worsening situation and reiterate our call for end to all hostilities. When innocent human lives are at stake, diplomacy must prevail as the only viable option. Recent reports of civilian killings in Bucha are deeply disturbing. We have unequivocally condemned these killings and support the call for an independent investigation. The impact of the crisis has also been felt beyond the region with increasing food and energy costs, especially for many developing countries. It is in our collective interest to work constructively, both inside the United Nations and outside, towards seeking an early resolution to the conflict. India has been at the forefront of protecting human rights, right from the drafting of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We firmly believe that all decisions should be taken fully respecting due process, as all our democratic polity and structures enjoin us to do so. This applies to international organizations as well, particularly the United Nations. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of India. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Timor-Leste.
At the outset, I would like to thank you, Mr. President, for convening this session. Mr. President, the position we took today to vote in favor of this resolution before all of us is a manifestation of our strong solidarity with the people of Ukraine, especially the victims of this war who have been forced to shelter and have fled across the country's borders, as well as those who have lost their homes, their lives, their family members, and their own lives. Our thoughts and prayers go out to all of them and their families and friends. Mr. President, our vote today shows our clear position to uphold human rights values in all circumstances and in all cases, as the dark period of our own history has taught us enough on the high cost of being victims of war. We call for an effective ceasefire in Ukraine and urge conflict parties to continue the dialogue and negotiation to stop this war and avoid further potentially catastrophic escalation. We commend the efforts of those who have facilitated the peace talks between conflict parties and all for more diplomatic initiatives to help in finding a peaceful solution for all. All parties must ensure the safety and protection of all civilians. It is our hope that peace is reclaimed immediately and that the important work for a healthy, prosperous, and sustainable future is restored for all. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Timor-Leste. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Qatar.
Thank you, Mr. President. We abstained from voting on the resolution that has been just adopted in this emergency special session, and I would like to make the following statement to explain our position. Qatar has expressed its position vis-à-vis the situation in Ukraine, which is anchored in its firm observance of the principles embedded in the international law and the United Nations Charter, including the inadmissibility of the use of force or the threat of use of force in international relations, and the importance of settling international conflicts peacefully, together with abstaining from interference in the internal affairs of countries, and to uphold the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of countries. And we have reiterated that the insurance of the safety of civilians should have the priority, and we stress the importance of upholding the international humanitarian law, together with protecting civilian infrastructure and facilities and civilians working in the medical and humanitarian fields, together with journalists, as well as facilitating the evacuation of civilians and the rapid and safe access to humanitarian aid according to the international principles of delivering humanitarian aid. And we commend the tireless efforts made by the United Nations and international humanitarian organizations to respond to the emergency humanitarian needs, and we continue to communicate with international partners to assess the humanitarian situation and to deliver the necessary aid to the Ukrainian people. Mr. President, we reiterate the call by the Secretary General to revert to the path of dialogue and negotiations and for an immediate ceasefire. We also reiterate Qatar's call for all parties to the conflict for self-restraint and to resort to diplomacy and dialogue. And Qatar will continue to harness its diplomatic efforts to reach a solution and resolution for the crisis according to the UN Charter and the international law. And we do welcome the Turkish mediation between Russia and Ukraine, and we hope that the negotiations will culminate into a peace accord between both countries. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Qatar. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Laos People's Democratic Republic.
Mr. President, the Lao PDR once again reiterates its call for peaceful political and diplomatic solution to the conflict and supports all ongoing efforts and peace negotiations between the parties concerned. Likewise, we urge the international community to refrain from any action that could fuel escalation of tension. As party to 7 of the 9 core human rights treaties, Lao PDR opposes all gross and systematic violations and abuses of human rights. We are gravely concerned by the recent reports and accusations of human rights and international human rights law violations and abuses. We are of the view that such serious allegations must not be taken lightly and must be backed up by solid evidence and verified by an independent investigation mechanism of the United Nations, especially the Human Rights Council Independent International Committee inquiries. My delegation voted against the draft resolution L4 because we believe that the reports of violations and abuses of human rights and violations of international humanitarian law must be verified by credible, neutral, impartial, and independent assessment mechanism before any action is taken. Lao PDR is concerned by the notion that any of member states of the UN Human Rights Council can be subject to suspension and other punitive measures without due process of investigation and verification. As this issue is of paramount importance for all United Nations members, we also believe that all GA resolutions should be adopted by consensus, reflecting the spirit of equality, solidarity among UN member states. In conclusion, my delegation believes there is a dire need for more clarification through an independent mechanism that should be accepted and supported by all member states before drawing conclusion and passing judgment. We remain hopeful that the most urgent task now is to create the environment conducive for a peaceful resolution to the conflict an immediate ceasefire agreement, which will eventually lead to total cessation of hostilities. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Laos People's Democratic Republic. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Indonesia.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is distressing to see the hostilities in Ukraine persist and the number of civilians and casualties continue to rise. We share the international community's deep concern regarding the devastating human rights and humanitarian situation in Ukraine. And we do not take lightly reports of gross and systemic violations and abuse of human rights, including recent reports from Bucha. For these reasons, we believe the Human Rights Council must remain seized on the matter and supports the Secretary General's call for a thorough and independent investigation. We also fully support the establishment of an independent international commission of inquiry by the Human Rights Council. Mr. President, there is no question that those responsible for violations and abuse of human rights in Ukraine must be held accountable and brought to justice. The Commission, therefore, must receive full support and access needed to effectively carry out its mandate. In the meantime, we have to give a chance for the Commission to work in an objective and transparent manner and present its findings and reports. We must allow due diligence and not prejudge the work of the Commission. The General Assembly must also be prudent. It is important.
我们必须要先收到所有的事实然后采取行动。
Members. Moreover, the General Assembly's action must not create negative precedents that can undermine the credibility of this august body. It is for these reasons Indonesia abstained on Resolution L4. Mr. President, Indonesia remains steadfast in our commitment to respect and protect human rights for all. Our priority now must be to save lives and protect civilians in Ukraine. We reaffirm our call to all parties to stop the hostilities and to spare no efforts to achieve peace through dialogue and diplomacy. This is the only way we can end the suffering and senseless loss of lives in Ukraine and to prevent the increasing negative impact of the war beyond the region. So we must stop the war, and I repeat, we must stop the war now, otherwise we will all suffer. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Indonesia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Panama.
Panama decided to vote in favor of the resolution suspension of the rights of membership of the Russian Federation and the Human Rights Council, since it supports the principles and purposes of the UN Charter and the Pillar of Human Rights, and especially because member states must abide by the